In the forgotten corners of Asia, where the mist clings like memory and the earth remembers every whispered vow, there are stories not meant to be told aloud, but we tell them anyway. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where ancient rites breathe beneath decaying altars, and the dead do not sleep until their stories are heard. Tonight, we bring you a tale soaked in longing, sealed in ritual, and carried on the backs of the fog. A story passed from mother to daughter, from elder to child, always in hushed voices, never past midnight. This is the tale of a bride who was never wed. She still waits in the forest, beneath a red veil, for a groom who never returned. And now, someone has come back with a camera. This is the bride who waits in the mist. The road into Doi Ruin Klang was not on most maps. It curved like an old scar through dense forest, gravel giving way to packed earth until the trees grew thick enough to block out the sky. No signs, no guardrails, only silence, the kind that pressed against your ears and made the air feel heavy. Liam had driven through plenty of back roads before, chasing the perfect frame for his photography portfolio. But this one felt different. Not dangerous, exactly. Just watched. His fiancée, May, sat beside him in the front seat, a bundle of lace and notebooks and wide-eyed wonder. She was scrolling through photos on her phone, references for their pre-wedding shoot. Ancient temples, floral altars, slow shutter shots of mist trailing through trees. Dreamy, ethereal, exactly the look she wanted. "Are you sure the temple is still here?" she asked, glancing up. "Google says it was abandoned decades ago." "It's still here. The head man confirmed it. Said the place isn't touched anymore, but the structure's intact." May nodded, then frowned. "He also said not to shoot there after dusk." Liam smirked. "He also said to bring salt and not whistle near the banyan trees." "That wasn't a joke, Liam," she said, voice low. "He was serious." They fell into silence. Outside, fog rolled in like breath across glass. The trees grew taller. The road narrowed again. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the forest parted. They arrived at the village in the hush of late afternoon. A cluster of stilted wooden homes clung to the hillside, their thatched roofs sloping beneath wide canopies of trees. Smoke curled from one chimney. Chickens wandered freely, and everywhere, absolutely everywhere, hung marigold garlands tied to doors, gates, trees, even power poles. Strings of orange, brilliant against the gloom. As Liam parked the car, a woman in a sun-faded sarong emerged from a nearby hut and eyed them warily. "You're the ones going to the forest temple?" she asked without greeting. "Yes, we have permission from the headman." The woman's gaze flicked to May, then lingered. "Don't wear white, not in the trees." "Why not?" May asked. The woman didn't answer. She just walked away, disappearing behind a beaded curtain without another word. The headman, a stooped man named Aran, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, welcomed them with lukewarm tea and stories older than stone. His home, perched at the village's edge, was filled with faded photographs and incense-heavy air. "You'll find a temple about an hour's walk in," he said, pointing to a trail beyond the backyard. "But you must return before dark. The mist comes fast, and the path vanishes with it." "Understood. We're just hoping to shoot a few test shots today. The full session's tomorrow morning." He hesitated. "You should know, the temple isn't empty." Liam paused. "You mean animals?" "I mean the kind of presence you can't photograph. Not clearly, anyway. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Long ago, a girl named Rian died before her wedding. Her family performed an old ritual, an offering, to bind her spirit to the groom who never came back. But he died in the forest, never returned, so she waits. May's hands tightened on her cup. That's just a legend, right? She asked, forcing a smile. Aran didn't smile back. She waits, he said again. The trail was narrower than expected, half overgrown, lined with spirit houses and moss-covered stones carved in forgotten scripts. As they walked, the jungle whispered in hushed breaths. Birds did not call, leaves did not rustle, only the sound of May's dress catching brambles and the soft click-click of Liam's camera as he snapped reference shots. The temple revealed itself in pieces, a fragment of cracked stone here, a broken lantern there, and then, finally, they saw it. A raised altar under an enormous banyan tree, its roots thick as arms wrapping around the base like claws. Marigolds lay withered at its feet. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something sweeter, rotting jasmine maybe, or incense long extinguished. Liam raised his camera. May hesitated. "Do you hear that?" she asked. He paused. "What?" "That humming, like a tuin, a woman's voice." He listened. Nothing. "There's no one here," he said, lifting the camera again. "Just us." But when he looked through the lens, he saw her. A woman standing just beyond the altar, still, straight, dressed in red, her face hidden behind a long, translucent veil that moved even though there was no wind. He blinked, lowered the camera, looked again with his naked eyes. She was gone. He exhaled slowly, then checked the preview screen on his camera. The figure, in red, was in 3 separate frames. Same spot, same posture, same veil. In one image, her head was tilted slightly, as if listening. In another, the edge of her veil had drifted upward, and in beneath it, Liam could almost see the curve of a mouth, smiling. But it wasn't a joyful smile. It was a smile that remembered pain and carried it like a crown. "Hey," May said behind him, "what if I wore red tomorrow?" Liam turned. "Red?" "I know it's not traditional for Thai brides, but something about that color in this forest, it feels right." He hesitated. "You hate red." "Not today," she said. "It just feels familiar." Her eyes looked strange in the dim light, distant. Liam said nothing, just turned back to the window, where the trees beyond the village swayed without wind. And somewhere deep in the forest, a wedding bell rang once, clear, faint, and tula te. The mist was thicker the next morning. It curled through the village like something alive, moving not with the wind, but with intention, slipping under doors, wrapping around stilts, and blurring the edges of the world. May woke first. Her dreams had been dense and wordless, not nightmares exactly, but heavy with a sense of unfinished business, a hand reaching through water, a mouth moving behind a veil, a vow whispered with no voice. She sat on the edge of the bed, fingers trailing the embroidered hem of her robe. For a moment, she didn't quite feel like herself. Her body was warm, but her hands were cold. Her name sat strangely in her mind, like it belonged to someone else. The room smelled faintly of marigold. Liam stirred behind her. The light outside was still dim, though it was past sunrise. "You're up early," he said, voice thick with sleep. "I couldn't stay asleep," May replied softly. "Too many dreams." He reached for the camera bag near the nightstand and began checking batteries and lenses. "Still want to shoot today?" She nodded. "Yes, but I want to wear red." Liam looked up. "That again?" She didn't smile this time. "I saw her, too," she whispered. Liam's hands stilled. "Who?" "The woman in red, in the trees. Last night, in my dream, she was standing where I stood. Her feet were bare. Her hands were folded. She wasn't angry, just waiting." The silence between them stretched. Liam finally said, "You probably just saw the photos. Your brain filled in the blanks." But even he didn't believe that. Not anymore. They returned to the temple by mid-morning, following the same path, though the mist had not lifted. It hung in thick sheets between the trees, catching the light in strange ways, bending it, softening it, until the world looked like a dream barely held together. May wore a long red skirt now, not bright, but deep like dried pomegranate skin. She had tied her hair back with a matching ribbon and walked slower than before, her gaze fixed on something just beyond the trail. Liam kept checking the viewfinder, trying to ignore the cold sweat forming at the base of his spine. The camera had been acting strange since last night. Blurred frames, soft static on playback, slight color bleeding around corners. He blamed the humidity, the lighting, anything but what he knew was really there. They reached the temple again just as the last marigold on the altar gave up its color and fell, pale and brittle, into the grass. May stepped forward without prompting. She moved as if pulled, not like someone preparing for a photo shoot, but like a woman returning to where she once belonged. "Take the picture," she said. He lifted the camera, hesitating. She stood beneath the banyan tree, framed by roots like ribs, the red of her skirt bleeding into the mist. Her face was calm, too calm. He took the shot. The shutter clicked. And then he saw it. Just behind her, a figure, again. This time, not standing still. She was reaching. A woman in red, veiled, pale hands lifting, fingers curled in invitation or warning. It was hard to tell. Liam blinked, looked away from the lens. Nothing. He checked the preview screen. The figure was there, again, closer than before, the veil trailing behind her like smoke underwater. And in the next frame, there were two of them, one facing the camera, the other turned away. May stepped forward suddenly, almost tripping. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said quickly, flicking off the camera and slinging it over his shoulder. "Let's head back. I think I've got enough for today." She tilted her head. "Already? We just started." "I know, but the lighting's changing." She opened her mouth to argue, then paused. Somewhere, very faintly, a bell rang. Soft, melancholy. One note only. Both of them turned, but there was no one in the trees. That night, Liam sat alone by the small table in the guest house, flipping through the photos. May was in the bath, humming a strange tune under her breath, something he didn't recognize, something old. The photos had worsened. Each frame showed more distortion, more artifacts that couldn't be explained away, faces blurred, mist curling unnaturally around May's body. And in one shot, a close-up, her eyes were looking past the camera. Behind Liam, and in the window pane's reflection behind her, there was another face. Not May's, not his. A woman, pale, red-veiled, her mouth stretched open, not in a scream, but in song. The bell rang again, not from outside, from the hallway. Liam stood slowly, opened the door. No one. But there, placed gently on the floorboards, was a folded piece of parchment. No name, no writing. He unfolded it. Inside was a single marigold petal, fresh and golden, and the faint outline of a red thread wrapped in a loose circle, like a ring. May didn't sleep that night. She stood at the window long after midnight, whispering something he couldn't hear. Her breath fogged the glass. Her fingers traced invisible symbols onto the pane. When Liam gently touched her shoulder, she turned, and for a moment, her eyes were not her own. Not frightened, not confused, but empty, like something else had slipped in behind them and wasn't done settling in. "I think we need to leave," he said softly. But she only smiled and whispered, "She's still waiting," then turned back to the window. Outside, the mist rose again, and this time it did not recede. The morning came slowly, as if the sun was reluctant to rise over Doe-Ruin Klang. Mist still hung low over the treetops, and the village felt even quieter than before. Chickens didn't crow, doors remained shut, even the dogs didn't bark. It was as though the village itself was holding its breath. Liam sat on the guest house porch with a cup of coffee gone cold. He hadn't slept, not really. Dreams had come in fragments, veiled faces, strings tied around fingers, the sound of bells ringing underwater. He stared down at the folded piece of parchment he'd found outside their room the night before. It was blank now. No petal, no thread. Just a pale, creased square of old paper, like something from a forgotten ledger. He'd searched the hallway after he found it. Nothing. No footsteps, no signs anyone had passed through. Only the faint scent of incense and something more floral. Jasmine, maybe, or funeral flowers. Behind him, the door creaked open. May stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes unreadable. "You're up," she said softly. "So are you." She nodded. "I heard it again. The bell." Liam turned to look at her. "When?" "In my dream. Only this time, it wasn't just one ring. It was a song, like a chant. And I wasn't me." He waited. "I was her," May said finally. "I was standing in the same place, by the altar, but I wasn't wearing what I wore yesterday. It was an old Thai wedding dress, red silk, embroidered. My face was veiled, my hands were cold." She paused, frowning. "I remember the weight on my head, a crown of flowers, but they were wilting." Liam didn't know what to say. She looked up at him now, her voice trembling. "I knew I was dead." Later that morning, they walked to the village square to buy water and supplies for the hike back. A few villagers lingered near the stalls, but no one would look them in the eye. When May reached for a basket of mangosteens, the vendor backed away as if her touch burned. One older woman, the same from the day before, finally stepped forward, eyes locked on May. "You've seen her, haven't you?" May hesitated. "Who?" The woman didn't blink. She chooses women with soft voices and sad eyes, women who can carry grief without letting it spill. She sees them, follows them, and if they stay too long, she steps inside. May's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The woman reached into her blouse and pulled out a tiny charm, a bundle of red string and dried petals tied around a sliver of bone. "Keep this near your skin. It won't stop her, but it might remind your soul where it belongs." She pressed it into May's palm. Liam stepped forward. "What do you mean, remind her soul?" But the woman had already turned and vanished down a side path, leaving only the smell of ash and blossoms in her wake. That afternoon, Liam tried to distract himself with his equipment. He reviewed the photos again, hoping that in daylight they'd look less terrifying. They didn't. In fact, one image had changed. The original photo, the one where May stood beneath the banyan tree, now had a subtle blur around the edge of her face. A translucent outline, barely visible, had formed beside her, like a second face overlapping hers. The eyes were shut, the mouth slightly open, as if in silent prayer. But it wasn't a camera glitch. It couldn't be, not when the blur had grown since yesterday. He backed away from the screen, heart pounding. That night, they didn't speak much. May sat at the edge of the bed, holding the charm the old woman had given her. She rolled it between her fingers, the threads tightening, loosening, whispering. "Do you hear it now?" she asked. Liam had his head. But then it came, soft, distant, like bells tolling through a thick fog. Not metal on metal, but bone on glass. Not loud, but intimate. "I think she's calling to you," May said. "No," Liam replied. "She's calling to you." May's hand trembled, and the charm dropped to the floor. That night, Liam dreamed again, or maybe it wasn't a dream at all. He stood in the forest, barefoot, the ground cold and wet beneath his feet. The mist was dense, but there was a light ahead, soft and golden, like lanterns floating in water. A procession moved toward him, figures in red robes, their faces obscured. Each held a bell in one hand and a marigold garland in the other. The bells rang softly in unison, but not with joy. It was mournful, like a farewell, not a celebration. In the center of the procession was a woman, veiled in red. She didn't walk, she glided. When she reached him, she stopped, and without lifting her veil, she whispered, "You came back this time." Liam tried to move but couldn't. "You left me before. You promised, but you never came." I'm not him," Liam said, the words catching in his throat. "You wore the thread. You said the vow. You were mine." Her voice was soft, but there was steel behind it, a cold fury wrapped in longing. "You're still mine." She reached for him, and when her fingers touched his chest, he woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. Beside him, May was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, unblinking, whispering a name over and over. "Rian, Rian, Rian." The next morning, Liam told Iran everything. About the dreams, the photos, the bells. The headman listened quietly, then lit a stick of incense and placed it in a cracked ceramic bowl on the floor. Rian was real. She was the daughter of a shrine keeper. Her groom-to-be vanished the night before the wedding. Some say he died in the forest. Others say he ran. Her parents, they couldn't bear her grief, so they performed an old ritual, forbidden even then. "What kind of ritual?" Liam asked. He didn't answer right away. "They tried to call his soul back, tried to bind it to hers so she wouldn't be alone in the afterlife. But you cannot force the dead to return." He looked up. "So instead, something else came and took her place." Liam's mouth dried. "What do you mean?" "She was buried, but the spirit remained. and now she waits for someone willing to finish what was started. May, who had been silent until now, whispered, "The bell?" Aaron nodded slowly. "It only rings when the vow is close to being fulfilled." Later, back in their room, May stood before the mirror, twisting the red ribbon through her hair again and again. "I remember the forest," she said softly, "not as it is now, but how it used to be, when the shrine was whole, when the altar was clean. I remember voices, women singing, the smell of candle wax." She looked over at Liam, her voice trembling. "I'm not dreaming, am I?" "No," Liam said. "You're remembering something that doesn't belong to you. Or worse, something that did long ago." She turned away from the mirror and walked to the window. The mist was rising again, and from somewhere far beyond the trees, the bell rang once more. This time, Liam heard it clearly, and for the first time, he understood. It wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. The temple ruins looked different in the afternoon light. Liam and May stood at the edge of the banyan's tangled roots, neither speaking, neither willing to take the first step forward. The air was heavier than before, not humid but oppressive, like something unseen was pressing down on them from the canopy above. May clutched the charm the old woman had given her, its red threads now frayed at the edges. She hadn't spoken much all morning, only muttering fragments of that ancient melody beneath her breath, as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored. Liam scanned the moss-covered stones around the base of the altar. Cracks split the earth like veins. The ground here had shifted over time, but the bones of the place remained. Symbols were carved into the stone, floral spirals, interlocked rings, and others more cryptic, triangular markings, circles wrapped in thread-like lines. "What are those?" he asked aloud. May didn't answer, but another voice did. "They're wedding sigils," came a voice from the trees. "Used in the old rites, before temples fell silent and monks stopped chanting their names." An old man stepped from the mist. He wore a saffron robe faded to rust, its hem dragging along the leaves. His eyes were milky with age, but steady. Around his neck hung a necklace of carved bone beads and dried lotus pods. "I was told you were here," he said to Liam. "The cameraman who sees things." Liam stepped protectively in front of May. "Who are you?" The monk bowed slightly. "Those who remember call me Phrakun. I am the last of the forest temple's keepers." "You're a monk?" He smiled thinly. "Not anymore, not since the vows were broken." He gestured toward the banyan. "She has been calling louder lately. You must have brought something with you, or perhaps someone." His eyes flicked toward May. She didn't flinch. "I see her in my sleep. I am her, and yet I'm not." Phrakun nodded slowly, as if this answer pleased him. "Then you must understand. This was never meant to be a curse. It was an act of desperation, a grieving mother, a broken promise. They performed the ritual in secret, believing love was stronger than death." He walked to the altar and knelt. Brushing aside the moss, he revealed a deep groove running through the stone, a channel carved with precision. This is the path of the thread. The soul-binding rite begins here. Liam frowned. You mean ghost marriage? He shook his head. No, older, more dangerous. The red thread ceremony. It doesn't just honor the dead, it binds the living to them, not symbolically, literally. He reached into his robe and withdrew a brittle scroll, yellowed with time. This is the rite they used. The parents gathered offerings, oil lamps, rice dyed red, marigold crowns, and a thread soaked in the bride's blood. They chanted for hours, calling the groom's soul through the trees, but he never came. Liam felt his stomach tighten. So what answered instead? The monk did not look at him. There are things in the forest that are not evil, but they are hungry. Spirits that linger at the edges of rituals, that slip into the spaces left open by grief. He unrolled the scroll. The script was ancient, looping, unreadable. The center held a drawing, a bride and groom kneeling under a tree, their wrists bound together by a red string. Their eyes were closed. Between them, a bowl of fire. By the end of the ritual, Prakun whispered, Rian was alone. The thread had no partner, so it turned inward, folded in on itself, and trapped her here. May's voice was hollow. She's not angry. No, the monk agreed, but she is waiting, and she is certain. He stood slowly, his bones cracking like old wood. If you stay here, she will take what she is owed. Liam stepped forward. Can the ritual be undone? A long pause. Only if the vow is reversed, if the thread is severed, but it comes at a price. What price? The monk looked at May. One soul must stay in her place. That evening, back in the village, the world felt smaller. Clouds gathered low over the rooftops, and the lanterns along the main path flickered uneasily in their frames. Thunder grumbled beyond the hills, but no rain came, just static in the air, a charge waiting to be released. May sat by the mirror again, combing her hair in slow mechanical strokes. She was supposed to be married at sunset. That's why the bell rings then. It was meant to guide the groom to her. Liam stood by the doorway, the monk's scroll clutched tightly in his hand. We can leave now. We drive through the night, get out before. I can't. Her voice was too calm. She's inside me now, not fully, but enough. I remember things I've never seen, names I've never spoken. I knew where the scroll was hidden before the monk unrolled it. She turned to him, eyes full of something deeper than fear. I think I know where the final piece is, the one missing from the ritual. Liam approached slowly. What is it? She held up her wrist. A ring made of red thread, soaked in his blood. It was meant to bind their souls completely. But it was never placed because he never arrived. She opened her other hand, and there, sitting in her palm, was the red thread from the parchment, the one Liam had found days earlier. It keeps coming back, she whispered, even when I burn it. Liam stepped back, heart pounding. How is that possible? But he already knew the answer. The thread wasn't physical. It was binding. to her, to him, to something older than either of them. That night, the bell rang again, but not softly this time. It was louder, sharper, a single note stretched into a dirge. Liam opened the window. Outside, the mist glowed red, and deep in the forest, he could see lanterns moving, a procession forming just like in his dream. Except this time, it was real. And they were waiting for someone to step forward.
The next morning, May was already outside when Liam woke. She stood barefoot at the edge of the garden, her hair loose, her red skirt trailing through the dew-wet grass. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, just staring into the trees, as if listening for something buried deep within the rustle of leaves. Liam watched her from the window, his chest tight with a quiet dread he didn't yet know how to name. When he stepped outside, she turned before he said a word. "Do you smell the oil lamps?" she asked. "What?" "The ones they lit before the vow. They burned cinnamon bark and jasmine. I smelled it in my sleep." She looked down at her hands, turning them slowly as if checking for soot. "I was holding one," she said, "in both palms, kneeling on silk. There were monks chanting, not many, just 3. One of them was blind." Liam stepped closer, trying to keep his voice steady. "That wasn't your memory." May looked up at him. "I know." She didn't sound afraid. She sounded resigned. They spent the morning combing the shrine ruins with Prakun's scroll in hand. The monk had been gone when they returned to the village. No one had seen him leave. No one seemed surprised. Some even acted as if he'd never been there. Only the scroll remained, tucked under their door, along with a small bowl of ashes and a marigold crown dried to powder. Liam traced the grooves on the altar with his fingers. This is where she waited. She must have knelt right here. May knelt beside him, without warning, without thinking, like muscle memory. "I placed the crown on my own head," she whispered, "because my mother's hands were shaking." Liam's heart skipped. "I remember the feel of the petals. Damp, heavy. They shouldn't have been that heavy." She looked up at him slowly, eyes glassy. "Why do I remember things I've never lived?" Liam didn't answer. He couldn't, because part of him was starting to remember too. That afternoon, while May slept fitfully under the mosquito net, Liam sat alone reviewing photos again. He needed something tangible, something real, something to remind him this was still just a bad dream, rooted in shadows and old stories. But the photos were changing. The frames that had once captured clear, sharp moments now bled around the edges, color leaking into light, shapes becoming too fluid, too soft. One image showed May from behind, standing at the altar. But her reflection in the camera lens, faint, almost invisible, was veiled, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely visible in the depth of the mist, stood another woman, identical posture, matching skirt, but no face, just blank space beneath the veil. And both sets of feet were not touching the ground. Liam slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in his throat. This was no longer about art, no longer about a strange coincidence or even a haunting. This was a merging, a folding of souls, and May, his May, was dissolving inside someone else's grief. That night, the dreams returned, but this time they belonged to Liam. He stood beneath the banyan, shirtless, arms outstretched. Red thread bound his wrists, winding down his arms like vines. A bell tolled somewhere behind him, deep and low and full of sorrow. Ahead of him stood Rayan. Her veil rippled gently, though the air was still still. She reached out, not to touch him, but to place something in his hand. It was a petal. and when he looked down, it bled. "I waited," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed through the forest like a chant. "I waited for your name, for your face. I remember the way you walked, the sound of your breath. You said you'd return." "I'm not him," Liam said, his voice breaking. "I'm not the one who left you." Her head tilted. "No," she whispered, "but you wear his shadow." The red thread tightened around his wrists, pulling his hands toward hers. "And she wears mine." Liam woke screaming, and May was already standing beside the bed, eyes wide, lips trembling. "I saw what you saw," she said. "I was her, watching you." They were dreaming the same thing at the same time. Later that morning, they sat by the edge of the forest, unsure of what to say. The village was quiet again, but not in a peaceful way. It was as if the whole place was holding still, waiting for something to finish. "I don't know who I am when I sleep anymore," May said. Liam looked at her, his voice barely audible. "Do you want to go?" She shook her head. "I can't, not until I understand what she wants." Liam stood, pacing, the crunch of leaves beneath his boots the only sound. "She wants a wedding." May didn't deny it. "And I think," she said slowly, "she's choosing you." He turned to her, startled. "What?" "She waited for someone who never came, someone who left her soul unfinished. But now you've stepped into the pattern. You stood where he stood, held the camera where he would have held her hand." "I never made a vow." His voice dropped. She met his gaze. "Not to her, but you made one to me." She placed a hand over his chest. "And I think that's what's keeping us both from disappearing completely." By dusk, the mist returned, not as fog this time, but as movement. It slithered low and slow across the ground, pushing open the gaps beneath the door, climbing the walls like ivy. With it came the scent of burning oil and flowers too sweet to be comforting. Liam and May sat facing each other on the wooden floor of their room, with a bowl of salt between them and the scroll laid out in the middle. "We have to find the end of the ritual before she finds the beginning again," May said. Outside, the first bell rang, and inside May's eyes, a different woman blinked. Not fully, not yet, but it was coming, and they were running out of time.
The forest felt different now. It no longer whispered, it watched. As Liam and May stepped through the tangled path toward the ruins, the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches heavy with silence. The air was thick with the scent of something ancient: damp earth, candle wax, wilted petals, and blood that had long since dried. May walked ahead, unafraid, as if each root and bend in the path was already known to her. Her pace was steady, her steps certain. Liam followed, his breath shallow, one hand on the camera slung across his chest, though he hadn't touched it in 2 days. It had stopped working properly anyway. The screen flickered now, static rolling like waves through every image. Faces distorted, shadows moved where there should have been none. And always, always the same silhouette behind May, standing just far enough away to never fully be seen. As they neared the temple clearing, the trees opened like a curtain being drawn back for the final act, and the forest exhaled. It was subtle, the faint stirring of leaves, the shifting of moss along the stones, as if the land itself had been holding its breath and now was breathing again, slowly, deeply, rhythmically, in, out, alive. Liam froze. "Do you feel that?" he asked. May didn't stop walking. "I think it's her, or what's left of her. This place remembers her grief like a body remembers pain." She stepped onto the altar platform and turned. "I need to show you something." The scroll had only shown part of the ritual,
But May had seen more, not in books, not in symbols, but in memories that surfaced when she closed her eyes. "There's something buried beneath the altar," she said. Liam looked at the thick roots beneath her feet. "Buried?" She nodded. She cut her finger before the binding, let it drip into a bowl of jasmine water. That's where the thread was soaked. The blood made it sacred, made it hers. And when the groom didn't arrive, she buried it. May knelt and began to clear away the loose leaves and vines at the base of the altar. The ground resisted at first, as though the forest itself was reluctant to release what had been hidden. But then the roots shifted, not away, but aside, curling like fingers being peeled back. Liam's breath caught. Beneath the altar was a stone bowl. Inside, coiled like something still warm, was a single loop of red thread, no longer vibrant, but dark and almost black, as if the blood within had hardened into permanence. And resting inside the ring was a tiny bone comb, its teeth cracked, one edge stained brown. May reached out with trembling fingers, but Liam stopped her. "Don't touch it." May looked up at him, her expression blank. "I already gave her my dreams. What else is there to give?" Liam didn't answer, because deep down he feared the answer was everything. The ground beneath the altar pulsed. It was slow, subtle, but unmistakable. Liam pressed his palm to the stone and felt it. A heartbeat. Not his, not May's. Something else. Something ancient. "I think the ritual never ended," he said slowly. "It was paused, trapped, like she pressed the breath between two syllables and never exhaled." May nodded. "And now that we're here, we're giving it air." The mist rolled in again, but this time it didn't obscure, it illuminated, like breath catching light. The forest became a theater of shadows, long exaggerated forms dancing on the edges of vision. Figures moved among the trees, ropes of red thread hung from branches, lanterns flickered to life, not lit by human hands, but remembered by the forest. The altar groaned, and the ground beneath it sighed. They returned to the village just before dusk, silent and shaken. Even the villagers seemed more distant now, or perhaps the couple had simply drifted too far into something the others had long since chosen to forget. Inside the guest house, May refused dinner. She sat by the window again, her face pale, her hair unbraided, the charm long gone from her neck. "I heard them," she said. Liam sat beside her, his voice soft. "Who did you hear?" "The monks," she whispered, "chanting, just like before, only this time it wasn't a memory. They were there, in the forest." Liam wanted to deny it, to say she was tired, to say that they were both unraveling. But he'd heard something too, not with his ears, but with the part of him that had started to remember things that weren't his to remember. He'd seen a temple, whole and glowing, built not of stone but of flame and prayer. He'd seen himself kneeling, red thread around his wrists, looking across at a woman whose face he couldn't see, but whose sorrow he could feel in his chest, like the weight of drowning. He hadn't just entered her story. He had lived it, or something had, through him. That night the dreams came again, but this time they shared them. Liam and May both asleep, both dreaming the same vision, as if their minds had been stitched together by the same crimson thread. They stood at the altar again, only this time it was not ruined. The temple breathed around them, the roof held by pillars of bone and wood, the floor covered in marigold petals floating on shallow water. Bells rang from every corner, the walls bled candlelight, and in the center stood her, Rianne. Her veil was longer now, trailing behind her like a train of smoke. She was not angry, not weeping, just watching, waiting, as she always had. She lifted her hands, and May stepped forward. The thread lay between them, one end tied around May's wrist, the other unclaimed, until Liam moved. Without realizing, without speaking, he stepped forward, and the thread rose like a living thing, coiling, binding, closing the vow. Liam woke with a cry, ripping the sheet from his chest, half expecting to see red thread wrapped around his arms. But there was nothing, just the sound of May crying softly in the dark. He crawled to her, pulled her into his arms. "I saw it," she whispered. "I saw us. I think the ritual completed itself." He held her tighter. "We need to end it, before it decides we're not just playing a part, before it decides we are them." Outside, the forest moaned, and the mist began to press against the windows, not like weather, like breath. The forest became breathing again, and it wanted them to inhale.
It began with the way May looked at him. Not with love, not with fear, but with recognition, as if she were seeing something familiar in him that even Liam didn't know he carried. She woke that morning before him again. He heard her humming softly in the corner, a tune that had no beginning and no end. It looped like a lullaby spoken in a language that had never been written down. Liam sat up slowly. "You okay?" May didn't answer immediately. When she turned to face him, her smile was distant. "You looked different in my dream last night," she said. "You wore white, not like a Western tuxedo, something older. Robes, a sash across your shoulder. You were kneeling. You looked so peaceful." Liam swallowed hard. "What was I doing?" She tilted her head. "You were waiting for me." He tried to respond, but something in his throat locked up, because he had dreamed the same thing, and in his version, she had worn red, silk wrapped around her body like smoke. Her hands were painted gold, her hair crowned in blossoms, and her eyes were not May's. They were Rian's, empty, patient, and terribly calm. He looked at her now, not the woman in the dream, but the one beside him, and for a brief moment the images overlapped. May's features blurred, her breath slowed, and behind her eyes something watched back. Not cruel, but possessive. She has chosen you, Liam thought, not as a vessel, as a groom. The village was nearly deserted by noon. The clouds overhead had thickened, and a strange wind moved through the trees, one that didn't belong to the weather. It felt ceremonial, like the forest was preparing itself. Lanterns had been removed from doorways, altars swept clean, even the stray dogs were gone. Liam and May walked the path to the temple in silence. No camera, no props, just the scroll wrapped in cloth and the red thread folded neatly into a wooden box. May carried it without being asked. She knew the weight of it already. When they arrived, the banyan roots had shifted again, moved aside, revealing more of the altar than before. The grooves along the stone surface had darkened, as if soaked in old blood, and the air was thick with a scent that Liam could only describe as marriage turned sour, sweet, rotten, eternal. May stepped up onto the platform, and Liam followed, not because he wanted to, but because some part of him had no choice. He stood beside her, and the forest responded. The wind stopped, the mist parted, and from between the trees, the red lantern procession began. They came slowly at first, figures cloaked in shadow, draped in old wedding garments, faces veiled, bare feet, bells in hand. Not spirits, not people, echoes. The emme playing itself again,
an imprint from the past burned into the bones of the land. And at the center of them all, the one who did not echo but endured, Rian. She moved like water through fog. Her veil was longer now, trailing behind her like a bridal train woven from night itself. When she reached the altar, she didn't look at May, she looked at Liam. And for the first time, he felt it fully. The pressure in his chest, the heat in his temples, the pulse of something ancient reaching through him. She knew him, not as Liam, but as the one who never came, as the one who left her waiting. And now she believed he had returned, to finish the vow, to stay, to be hers. May did not move. She stood at the altar, eyes closed, lips parted. Liam turned toward her, but the face that met his was not hers anymore. The veil had shifted, not in cloth, but in soul. Rian was no longer just inside May. She was May. Her posture, her breath, the way her fingers rested over her stomach as if expecting a blessing. "You came back to me," she said, not out loud, but in his mind. Liam staggered backward. "I'm not him. You know I'm not." Rian tilted her head. "But you could be." The forest held its breath again, and Liam saw it, the choice forming. One step forward, and he could complete it. One step back, and May might never return. But either way, someone would be left behind. The scroll slipped from his hands. It hit the altar like a final offering, and the wind moved again. But this time, it howled. The lanterns flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows across the forest walls. The figures began to tremble, their outlines smearing like ink in water. Rian's veil lifted slightly, just enough to show her mouth. It was smiling, but not from joy, from certainty. She had him, bound. May cried out, not with fear, but with longing. "I remember it now. The vows, the words, the thread around my wrist. I never took it off, even after I died." Liam tried to reach her, but the thread, now alive, wrapped around his wrist like a serpent. It burned. Not pain, recognition, a soul being claimed. He gasped, pulling back, but it held fast. "You can't take me," he cried out. "I don't take," Rian whispered. "You give." And May was fading, her skin losing warmth, her eyes glassing over. "Please," Liam whispered, "don't take her from me." The forest answered with silence, because it wasn't up to the trees, it was up to him. Somehow, through the panic, the ritual, the blur of memory and mist, Liam remembered something Prakun had said. The thread was never tied to a soul, only to an absence. That's why she lingers. A vow unfinished, a ritual suspended, a bride waiting, but a groom never chosen, until now. Liam stepped forward, cut the thread, not with a knife, but with his words. "I release you." The forest shuddered. The altar cracked, the mist screamed, and the red thread turned black. Ash. Rian's eyes widened behind the veil, not with rage, but disbelief. "You would leave me again?" she whispered. Liam wept. "I was never yours." And in that moment, the veil dropped. Rian's face bloomed like sorrow, beautiful, ruined, and full of endless waiting. Then she was gone. So were the lanterns, so were the shadows. Only May remained, collapsed, breathing, alive, but changed forever. The thread had burned, but its presence lingered.
Liam could still feel it wrapped around his wrist long after it had turned to ash, a phantom pressure that pulsed faintly beneath his skin, like a memory with a heartbeat. He sat beside May in the empty shrine clearing, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of shallow sleep. Her body trembled beneath the weight of whatever had just left her, or perhaps whatever had only partially departed. Her skin was pale, her lips slightly parted, as though she'd been pulled from deep water but hadn't yet learned how to breathe again. Above them, the banyan branches swayed with no wind. The forest had fallen silent once more. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a ritual interrupted. By the time dusk came, May could speak again. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for days. "She didn't leave," she whispered. Liam turned sharply. "I thought—" "No," she said, shaking her head. "She's not in me, but she's not gone either. She's around me now, waiting, watching." She looked down at her wrist. Faint lines circled it, marks left by thread that no longer existed. "She thinks I broke the vow, that I ruined her wedding." Liam didn't speak. He thought of the smile beneath Rian's veil, soft, sure, eternal. That wasn't the smile of someone who had given up. That was the smile of someone who knew the ceremony wasn't over. It had only begun again. Back in the village, the headman met them at the gate. Aaron said nothing at first, just stared at them both for a long moment, his face grim, lined with something older than age. "You stepped on the altar," he said. It wasn't a question. May nodded weakly. "I remembered everything." "And you?" Aaron turned to Liam. "I hesitated. I broke the thread." Aaron didn't blink. "Did you sever it in spirit or only in fear?" Liam didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. Aaron led them to his home in silence, then retrieved something from a wooden box wrapped in banana leaves. It was another scroll, older than the one Prakun had given them, fragile and brittle. "This is the full rite, the red thread ceremony, as it was once practiced before the temples fell. It was not merely a vow between souls, it was a binding of blood, a sacrifice of time, a life exchanged for remembrance. Once performed, it cannot be simply undone." He unrolled the scroll. At the center was an illustration, more detailed than the previous one. It showed two figures kneeling, hands tied together, red thread wound around their wrists and throats like a garland. Between them burned a brazier filled with bones, petals, and a single tooth. Liam felt sick. "What's the tooth for?" Aaron answered without emotion. "To tie the voice of the living to the silence of the dead, so that the vow can be heard on both sides." May flinched. "I remember biting something," she whispered. "In the dream. It cracked between my teeth." Aaron nodded slowly. "She marked you, which means you are now a bridge." He looked at Liam. "And you are the offering." The wind howled that night. Doors slammed themselves shut. Lanterns flickered. Dogs howled into nothing. May sat on the floor of the guest house, tracing the new scroll with her fingertips, her hair hanging like a curtain across her face. She was murmuring again, not chants this time, but names. Rian, Khunjirat, Nong Tip, Sao Pitch. Liam approached her cautiously. "Who are they?" She didn't look up. "The other brides." His heart dropped. What? She wasn't the only one. They tried this ritual before or after. I don't know. Maybe both. Maybe the forest draws them here. Maybe it's a place of forgetting, of remembering. She looked up at him, eyes red-shot. I think this place is a mirror. Every soul who waits for a vow to be kept ends up here, bound to the altar, bound to someone who doesn't even know they're part of it yet. So what happens if the vow is completed? She stared through him. One person stays, the other walks away, but never fully whole. Later that night, Liam found something in the camera. He hadn't touched it since the ceremony, but now, drawn by instinct, he opened the file folder and saw something that hadn't been there before. A video, one he hadn't recorded. It showed the altar at night, empty. Then, May stepped into frame, alone. She was dressed in full bridal attire, red silk, golden cuffs, a veil of crushed jasmine petals. She looked straight at the lens, and then, in a voice not quite her own, she said, "Do you take me into memory to remain even when I fade? Do you hold me in silence when all else forgets my name?" Then the image distorted, flickered, and cut to black. Liam sat in the dark, hands trembling. This wasn't over. The thread had been burned, but the vow, it still waited to be spoken. The mist arrived earlier than usual. It did not drift. It descended. By late afternoon, the hills behind the village had vanished into white. The air was thick and still, like the world had been wrapped in gauze. Even sound moved differently, slower, muffled. Voices didn't echo, leaves didn't rustle. Everything was hushed, like the earth was waiting for something sacred or something doomed. May had not spoken since morning. She sat by the window, her eyes unfocused, her breath fogging the glass in slow, rhythmic pulses. Liam called her name once, then again, louder, but she didn't respond. It was as if her body was present, but her mind had drifted somewhere far, into a space where time did not exist. He touched her shoulder gently. She blinked, once. And for a brief, terrible moment, he saw mist inside her eyes. A soft whiteness swirling across her irises, clouding the dark centers. Then it was gone. She turned her head toward him and smiled faintly. I remember the wedding night, the silence in the room, the garland at the door. I remember lying down in a dress soaked with sweat, waiting for footsteps that never came. Liam felt the back of his neck prickle. That's not your memory. She didn't argue. She only whispered, not anymore. As the sun dipped behind the mist, the village seemed to vanish. Liam stepped outside, clutching a flashlight that barely cut through the air. The path ahead looked warped, like a dream being held together by fragile threads of memory. He turned in a slow circle. No villagers, no sound. Even the birds had gone quiet. He stepped back inside and found May gone. The door was ajar. Her scarf was still hanging on the nail. He ran outside, heart slamming against his ribs. May! No answer. Only the thick, unmoving mist. May! Still nothing. Then, just barely, he heard it. A voice. Faint. Familiar. Singing. The same melody she'd hummed in her sleep. The same chant that wove its way through every dream. He followed the sound deeper into the mist.
The path curved when it shouldn't have. The banyan trees appeared closer together than before. And still the mist hung low, thick enough that Liam could barely see his own feet, but somehow thin enough that he could feel the presence moving just beyond sight. He called again, "May, please!" Another voice answered, but it wasn't hers. "You made the vow." Liam turned in every direction. Nothing. "You stood before me." The voice was a whisper, a breath in his ear, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You never came back." Then, a shape moved ahead. May, or something wearing her body. She walked barefoot, slowly, her red shirt dragging behind her like smoke. Her arms hung loose at her sides, and her head was tilted slightly, as if listening to music no one else could hear. Liam ran. "May!" She didn't stop. He grabbed her arm. Her skin was cold. She turned to face him. Her eyes were completely white, not rolled back, not blind, but filled with the mist, with the forest, with everything ancient and waiting and unfinished. Her lips parted. "Do you take me?" Liam staggered back. "I'm not the one," he said, his voice shaking. She stepped closer. "You wear his breath, his shadow. You speak his name in your sleep." "I don't know his name." She reached up, fingers brushing his jaw. "But I do." Then her eyes flickered. The white receded. Her pupils returned, and May collapsed. Back at the guest house, Liam wrapped her in every blanket he could find. Her breathing was shallow, her hands trembled, but her eyes were open again, clearer now, though rimmed with red. "I was somewhere else," she whispered. "Somewhere beneath this place. I saw walls made of tree roots. I saw brides lined up in a row, all waiting, all veiled." She clutched his wrist suddenly, her grip stronger than expected. "She's trying to wear me, like a wedding dress, like silk over skin." Liam held her tightly. "We'll find a way. There has to be a way." May shook her head. "She's not angry anymore. That's the worst part. She's certain. She thinks I was made for this." A tear slipped from the corner of her eye. "And part of me thinks she might be right." Later that night, Liam couldn't sleep. He paced the floor, listening to the wind scrape against the wooden walls. The camera sat on the table beside the scroll, untouched since the last recording. But now the screen glowed faintly. A new image, not a video, a still, a photo of Liam, asleep, May beside him, and in the far corner of the room, a figure in red, face veiled, feet floating inches above the floor, and around her wrist a red thread, leading across the room, tied to Liam's hand. He turned the camera off, then crushed the battery beneath his heel. But the image remained, burned into his memory like flame, because now he understood this wasn't just May's haunting. It wasn't just Rianne's revenge. It was a claim, and he was next. The forest was not always cursed. Long before the mist clung to its roots like a second skin, before altars cracked and vows turned to ashes, it had been sacred, a place where couples knelt in the presence of monks and spirits alike, where oaths echoed through banyan groves and the breath of the forest held witness. But something changed, and Rian became its bride, not through celebration, but through abandonment. May began to speak in her sleep, not just murmurs, full conversations in a dialect older than the village itself, words that curved and looped like river water, thick with sorrow, smooth with ritual. Liam stayed awake to listen. He didn't understand what she was saying, but he felt it. Each syllable carried the weight of memory, not May's, not his, but Rion's, a grief so constant it had become its own kind of faith. On the third night, May sat up mid-dream and whispered, "He was meant to come back. He promised. He went into the forest for me, to find the flower that only blooms once. I waited and waited, and when the sun fell 3 times, I stopped breathing, but I did not die." Liam took her hand. Who was he? May's eyes remained closed, but her lips moved. Jirat, the youngest son of the shrine keeper. His mother forbade him, but he loved me more than gods. Then she lay back down, and her breathing deepened, as if the weight of telling the story, even in a voice not her own, had exhausted whatever borrowed life still lingered in her veins. Liam returned to Erin the next morning. The headman was outside, burning dried herbs and tossing salt into a clay bowl. His face was tired. He looked thinner than before, like the forest had begun to feed on him too. "She's remembering," Liam said. "Not just dreams, real things, names, events, places." Erin didn't flinch. "It always starts with memory. That's what the forest keeps them." Who was Jirat? The old man stirred the salt without answering. Then finally, he was her promised one. He left on the morning of their wedding to find a flower that blooms only during the last mist of the monsoon, a rare offering, something sacred to seal the ceremony. He was warned not to go. But he did. Yes, and he never returned. They say the forest took him, but some say he turned back, too late, found her already buried, the vow incomplete. So, he's still here. The headman nodded slowly. Not alive, not fully dead, just held. By her? Erin didn't reply. He didn't need to. That night, May left the guest house again, but this time she wasn't sleepwalking. She was following something. Liam awoke to find her side of the bed cold, the window open, the mist thick enough to choke. He ran after her without shoes, calling her name into the fog. His voice felt swallowed, dampened. Each step took him deeper into a forest he no longer recognized, paths that didn't belong, trees that curved toward him like ribs. But then through the mist, he saw her. May, standing at the altar again, alone. And before her, a new figure. Not Rion, a man. Young, pale, dressed in ceremonial white. Jirat. His hands were bound by red thread. His face, peaceful. His eyes, hollow. And between them, May stood in silence, not resisting, not afraid, just ready. Liam stepped forward, but the forest pushed back. The mist thickened, the air grew dense. He could see her, but not reach her. May turned toward the altar and knelt. The red thread slithered from the man's wrist and wrapped around hers, tight. And the vow began again. Liam awoke in the dirt, alone. No altar, no thread, no May. The forest was silent, but something had changed. The mist no longer hung in the trees. It was inside him. By the time he made it back to the village, dawn had broken. The guest house door stood open. May was there, alive, but not untouched. She was brushing her hair slowly in the mirror, lips painted red. Her wrists were bare, but Liam could see the thread still there, invisible now, but undeniably present. She looked at him through the reflection. "He's waiting," she said. Liam stepped closer. "Who?" Her eyes met his. "You are." He froze. She turned to face him fully, and for the first time since they arrived, her voice was not distant, it was certain. "I'm not just Rian. I'm not just May. I'm something between, something bound by promise and memory." She stepped toward him, eyes soft. "I know what you did. I remember the vow, the way your hands trembled when you tied the thread. I didn't—" She raised a hand gently. "It doesn't matter. You're here now." She placed his hand over her heart, and he felt it. Not one heartbeat, but two.
The vow had been spoken, not aloud, not in language, but through presence, through remembering, through returning. And now the forest was closing in. Liam could feel it, a gentle pressure on the edges of thought, a slow unraveling. The thread might have been invisible, but its pull was real. Each breath he took felt heavier than the last. Each time he looked at May, he saw less of her, or maybe more of someone else. She still smiled the way May used to, soft and lopsided, eyes full of thought, but there was something behind it now. Something steady, patient, eternal. Like someone waiting to finish what was started long ago. He spent the morning searching the forest, following half-buried stone markers, crawling into shrines swallowed by moss and time. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, only that if the ritual could begin without warning, perhaps it could be undone the same way. He returned to the altar. The banyan had shifted again. The roots had formed a circle around the platform now, like ribs enclosing a heart. And at the center of the stone was something new, a shallow basin, empty, but stained dark red at the base. Liam knelt beside it, closed his eyes, and felt a pulse beneath the stone, like a memory or a warming. He dug at the base of the roots, his fingers bleeding against bark and earth. Then he found it, a piece of carved wood, weathered and cracked. A box. Inside, a folded cloth, yellowed by age. And beneath it, parchment. Ink long faded, but not unreadable. The original reversal rite. The words scratched in desperation, marked with broken strokes, as though the one who wrote it had done so with shaking hands or from the other side of grief. To unbind, one must walk backward through the vow, not with feet, but with meaning. The offering must return, the bride must release, and the witness must remember who they were before they became part of the forgetting. Liam read the lines again and again, then looked down at the altar. The offering must return, the bride must release, the witness must remember. He was the witness. May, or Rian, was the bride. And the offering? His blood ran cold. It had to be Jirat. He returned to the village and found May waiting at the threshold. She was dressed in white now, not bridal, funerarial. A soft silk robe wrapped tightly at her waist, her hair unbound, wet as if freshly bathed. She looked at him. "You found it," she said. He nodded.
Do you know what it means? Her gaze didn't waver. I was there when it was written. She stepped forward, touching his face gently. He tried to undo it once, before he died, before he became part of the altar. But he didn't have enough of himself left. Where is he? Liam asked. Her fingers dropped. In the roots, in the mist, in the space between the vow and the silence. Liam's throat tightened. Can I find him? You already have, she whispered, then stepped aside and let him pass. That night, Liam returned to the altar alone. He carried no offerings, only memory, only intent. He stood in the center of the root circle and began to speak, but not to the forest, to Jirat. I know why you came back. You loved her. You were willing to defy gods for her. But when you returned and found her gone, you let yourself become part of the vow instead of breaking it. The mist curled tightly around the roots. I don't blame you, but I need you now. I need your part of the vow to return. Silence. Then, a figure stepped forward, not from the trees, but from the earth. Jirat. Not young, not old, just sorrowful. His face was cracked like clay, his body more shadow than flesh, but his eyes were full of unfinished love. He looked at Liam, then nodded, and stepped onto the altar. The mist trembled, the roots recoiled, and May arrived, still in white, still silent. She looked at Jirat, then at Liam, and in a voice that belonged to both herself and someone far older, she said, "Do you come to return what was never yours?" Liam nodded. "I do." She stepped forward, unwound the invisible thread from her wrist, and placed it gently on the altar between them. Jirat knelt. Liam stepped back, and the altar groaned, not from weight, but from release. The forest screamed, branches split, stones cracked. The mist turned red, then gold, then vanished altogether. The sky opened above them, clear, unburdened, and Rian, what remained of her, stepped out from May's body like a shadow peeling away from skin. She stood for only a moment, veil lifted, face whole. She looked at Jirat. He opened his arms, and together they vanished, like breath, like silence, like a vow that had finally been answered. Liam fell to his knees. May collapsed beside him, and for the first time since their arrival, the forest did not breathe back. It only listened, and finally let go. The forest no longer breathed. It listened, and in its silence, Liam could hear the faint echo of something ancient shifting, like the groan of roots pulling away from a long-held secret. The vow had been broken, or so he thought. May lay beside him beneath the altar tree, her head resting in his lap. Her skin was warm again, her breath steady. The mist had lifted, the sky was visible. The weight of Rian's sorrow, of Jirat's haunting presence, of the thread that wrapped around everything, they were all gone, at least on the surface. But some truths don't vanish. They wait. They watch. They look for cracks to crawl back through. By the time they returned to the village, the sun had already set. The villagers were outside for the first time in days, standing in doorways, lighting candles not in mourning, but in quiet gratitude. A man they'd never met bowed as Liam and May passed. "You brought her peace," he said. Aran confirmed it later. "The air is lighter," he said. "The altar is quiet. She's not calling anymore." May said nothing. Her face was pale, her lips dry. She'd barely spoken since the forest. She only walked with Liam's hand in hers, her fingers loosely curled, as though unsure whether they were holding on to him or someone else. That night, they didn't dream. No voices, no veils, only sleep, still, silent, deep. It began again the next morning. Small things. A drop of red water in the bowl near the sink. The faint smell of wilted marigolds in their room, even though none had been brought inside. The camera, left untouched for days, powered itself on and played footage Liam never recorded. A video of the altar. This time, the stone was empty. No brides, no grooms. Only the breeze and a whisper. So soft it took 3 replays for Liam to make it out. One must still stay. He turned to May, but she was already standing at the door, eyes unfocused, mouth slightly open, and then she collapsed. They brought her to the headman's home. Aran pressed dried herbs to her chest, whispered prayers from forgotten rites, poured blessed water across her brow. "She's not possessed," he said. "She's echoing." Liam's voice shook. "What does that mean?" "She walked too far into the vow. Even after the spirits moved on, the path remained. She crossed the altar. That means part of her stayed behind." Liam stepped back. "No, we released them. Rian and Jirat. The vow was broken." Aran met his eyes. "Their vow, yes. But what about yours?" Liam froze. "What?" "You stood on that altar with her. You promised to find the truth. You promised to save her. And in doing so, you tied yourself to her soul." He gestured to May, who lay on a mat, her breathing shallow. "She's trapped in the place between, and now the forest waits for a new vow to end what the last one began." Liam's voice was barely a whisper. "So what do I do?" Aran turned to the window, watching the mist begin to gather again beyond the trees. "You cross the altar, alone." That night, Liam returned to the forest. It was darker than before, not from absence of light, but from presence of shadow. Shapes moved along the path, faces blinked from tree trunks. The silence was thicker than noise. The altar waited, clean, unburdened, and yet still alive. Liam stepped into the circle of roots, and the air shifted, a pulse beneath his feet. The world blinked, and he was no longer alone. It was May, but not. She stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot, veiled in white, her posture soft, her mouth silent. Liam stepped forward. "May?" She tilted her head, eyes glazed. Then, in a voice not hers, not Rian's either, but something older, something woven from the forest itself, she spoke. "You came back." Liam's hands trembled. "I never left." "Then finish it." A thread unspooled from her waist, bright red, gleaming like blood in moonlight. It floated toward him, wrapping once, twice around his fingers, and the forest breathed again. But it wasn't suffocating. It was waiting. A question held in mist, a vow suspended in stillness. Liam knelt, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I vow to remember, to carry her name even if she forgets it, to walk beside her even when the path ends, to leave nothing behind." The thread pulsed, and May exhaled for the first time in days. She opened her eyes. They were clear, alive, and filled with him. The forest lifted, not just a mist, but the weight. The shadows receded, the altar cooled beneath his knees, and the red thread, still wrapped around their hands, shimmered once, then vanished. Not burned, not severed, simply released. They walked back without speaking. No need. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of memory, of promises made not in fear, but in love, and of a vow that belonged to them now, one not written in blood, but in choice.
The vow had been spoken, but the forest was not finished. For 3 days the mist did not return. The sun rose without resistance. Birds returned to the trees, and the villagers moved about as if waking from a long collective dream. Candles were extinguished. Doorways were swept clean. To them, it was over. But Liam knew better. There was one thing left unresolved. May. She had changed, not in ways the villagers could see. She smiled, she spoke, she walked with Liam through the village, hand in hand, just as they used to. She helped sweep the porch in the morning and lit incense at the headman's altar before dusk. But her silences were longer now. Her eyes sometimes stayed fixed on the tree line too long, and some nights, when she thought Liam was asleep, she whispered names into the darkness, names that were not hers to know. And once, just before sunrise, Liam heard her murmur, "I don't know which life is mine." That morning, Liam returned to the shrine one final time, alone. The roots had withdrawn. The altar was dry. The basin was clean. The forest did not speak, but it watched. He sat there for hours, thinking of every step that had led them here. He hadn't come for ghosts. He had come for a photograph, a moment, a future. And somehow, he had fallen into the memory of a woman who had waited 100 years for someone to stand where he stood. And in doing so, he'd placed May between two lives, neither of which fully belonged to her. She hadn't chosen this. She had followed it. But now, she had to choose, one way or the other. That night, he brought May to the shrine. She didn't speak as they walked the path, didn't flinch when the trees closed in around them. She simply walked, like someone returning to the place where her story had begun. They stood before the altar together, and May turned to him. "Do you know what it means to be a vessel?" she asked. Liam nodded slowly. "To hold something for a while." She looked up at the trees. "I held her, but she held me too.
All those years of waiting, of love twisted into longing, they live inside me now. I remember the way her mother wept, the way her hands trembled tying the thread. I remember his voice, Jirat. I know now that he did come back, but not in time. She paused. Liam reached for her hand. What do you want now? She looked down at her fingers, twisting the red ribbon she'd tied at her wrist. I don't know. I feel like two people stitched together by one breath. He didn't speak, because he knew words wouldn't fix what time had fractured. She stepped up onto the altar, barefoot, eyes steady, and looked out into the forest. I never said goodbye, she whispered. Not as me, not as her. Then louder. Rian, I carried your name, but I am not yours. The wind shifted, branches bowed, and in the trees, for the first time, no figure stepped forward, no veil, no echo, only stillness. And then, the faintest chime of a bell, once, twice, then silence. May turned to Liam. Tears ran silently down her cheeks. She let go, she said, and for the first time since they'd arrived, her eyes were only hers. They left the forest together, step by step. No spirits, no thread, no mist. Just two people walking side by side, carrying memory, but no longer burdened by it.
Years passed. The shrine fell quiet. The marigold stopped blooming along the forest path. The thread that once tied wrist to wrist, vow to vow, returned to the soil as dust. Time, as it always does, moved on. Tourists came and went. The forest grew thick again, but the altar remained. Beneath the shade of the old banyan, covered in moss and memories, the stone still stood. No one touched it. No one swept the basin clean. And though the monks no longer walked that trail, the air near the roots still felt sacred or haunted, depending on who you asked. May and Liam left the village a month after the ceremony. They moved to the city. They married quietly, with no cameras, no thread, no altar, just two signatures and a shared glance that said, "We've already walked through something far deeper than this." They spoke little of Doi Run Klang, not out of fear, out of respect. Sometimes, in the early mornings when the sky was still gray, Liam would wake to find May sitting at the window, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on nothing. "Do you still feel her?" he asked once. May smiled softly. "No, but I remember what it was like to be her." That was enough. One day, years later, a traveler wandered into the village. She was young, quiet, and curious, a backpack slung over one shoulder, a camera around her neck. She asked about old temples, folklore, places untouched by time. An old man in the market gave her directions to a path no longer marked. She followed. The forest welcomed her like it did all who arrived with questions. Softly, silently. The trees leaned in as she passed. The air cooled. The sounds of the village
faded behind her. Then, as the path curved one final time, she found it. The altar, alone beneath the banyan. She raised her camera, but before she could take the photo, something moved, barely at the edge of the frame. A shape, a veil. She turned quickly. Nothing. Only mist curling along the ground. And yet, she felt it. A presence. Not angry, not lost, just waiting. The traveler stepped closer to the altar. On the stone was a single offering, a loop of red thread, untied. And somewhere, deep in the roots of the forest, the mist still waits.